thank you for tuning in to Nobody's Listening, my podcast where I sit around and talk to myself because nobody else cares what I have to say. And today I'm going to talk about another one of my terrible opinions that nobody wanted to hear in the first place because I am frustrated with my job. So today I'm going to talk about minimum wage. I currently work as a phlebotomist when I'm filming this. And so that means that I am in the medical field, but I'm not high up or anything. I am certified to stab people all day. And I make $16.50 because I got a raise recently, which I know there's probably someone in like Minnesota or like Montana that's like, wow, that's a lot of money. Rich lady over here. In New York, that's nothing. In New York, you start at fast food places at $15 an hour. Ish. In New York, $16 an hour doesn't go anywhere. And that's not much money at all. At least the side of New York I'm on. The side of, in New York City, $15 an hour is the minimum wage. I think it's 12 or 13 something up here. Fact check that for me, Moose. What's the minimum wage in Western New York?
15.
Oh, it's 15 here too?
Yeah.
Alright. All of New York State now has the same minimum wage of $15 an hour, which means that $16.50 is not that much more. And when you get paid bi-weekly, you're making like $13 an hour after. Because taxes are horrible and we should eat the rich. Thank you. That is all. But I was saying to people recently, people are like, oh wow, are they at least giving you hazard pay for having to deal with all these COVID patients who keep yelling at you because they don't want to wear a mask and they want to lick everything in the building and cough on you and hand you bags full of literal human feces? No. No, they don't. I actually made hazard pay for the month and a half I worked as an aide at a terrible nursing home that I would never go back to again because it's a terrible place to work. But I don't make any I make just my flat rate of not enough money to support my current lifestyle in a rental property with a small human that feeds off of me for his existence and can't live without me because he is only one. Yep. Not a nice thing to think about. I actually recently was talking to a coworker because they're like, well, why are you even here? Like, at least you're making more than you did as a bartender and a waitress. And I'm like, no, I don't make more than that. I actually made more money when I was in high school working as a waitress, like 3 days a week. Made a lot more money. Which I think is probably more depressing than anything else on this entire planet. But to carry on, minimum wage jobs, like, I think that, I know a lot of people view minimum wage jobs as like your high school job, yeah. But I don't think people realize just how many jobs are minimum wage jobs. Or that we can't have McDonald's open for lunch if it's just for high schoolers. And I know you want your Big Mac, Jim, so you can shut up. I think that I personally am of the belief that everyone at every job should be able to make a living wage if they're working full-time. So, if you're working full-time, you should be able to afford rent for yourself. I don't think that I personally am of the belief that you should be able to afford to live in like a 1-bedroom on your own, with your own money at a minimum wage job, and then for other circumstances, there should be, like, if it's just you and a child or something, there should be, like, programs available in the case that you are not making enough. I don't know exactly, I'm bad at this stuff with government programs and whatever, but, they exist for a reason, and they are there for those who need them, and hopefully continue to be for a long time to come. Bless you. Moose just sneezed. He's dying. But I actually, about 2 years ago now, I got in a conversation with somebody, and this just made me think of that. They were saying that they don't think that if you're making minimum wage, you should be able to afford to live alone. They said that you should be able to afford your rent and, food, some leisure activities, like not necessarily go out and party and drink every night type thing, but like be able to have a nice meal where you either buy something nicer like a steak and the lobster or whatever, or go out to dinner every once in a while. It shouldn't be a nightly thing. If you can afford to do that nightly, then you're very lucky, I think. But they said that they don't think that living alone is a basic right. They think it should be that, like, there's nothing wrong with having to live with a roommate. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but I don't know if I agree that that should be, like, the minimum is that you should have to live with a roommate, because I think that that doesn't take into account children and partners. Because I think that if there are two of you living in one space, like Moose and I live together in a 2-bedroom townhouse with the baby who cancels out one of our incomes essentially. Not quite, but he does cost a lot. I don't necessarily think that we should be, like, stuck at the very bottom because we're barely making above minimum wage. And this isn't to say anything about, like, not being lucky to have a job. I am lucky to have a job. Moose is very lucky to have a job, even though both of our jobs kind of suck. Only, like, a lot. We are, I personally feel that, minimum wage work, like, even working at McDonald's, if you're a full-time employee at McDonald's, because I used to not actually have this mindset. I didn't necessarily have an opinion on this before, but I used to also view McDonald's as, like, a high school, college job, until someone explained it to me in the way of, like, well, then who's going to work there when people are at school? And it wasn't like a discriminate against people, like, oh, you don't deserve pay type of thought process I had before. It just didn't seem like a full-time career to me. Because I was naive. Which I am working on educating myself and becoming less ignorant with things like that. But, it takes time. I grew up being told that those were jobs for high school and college students. And so it was kind of ingrained in my head. But now, as a person who is their own functioning adult, I can see exactly why those are not just jobs for high school and college students. Again with the yawns. Last week we didn't get enough yawns, so I have to make up for it this week. I think that that's another thing that a lot of people miss out, is that opinions can evolve, because just because I said something 5 years ago doesn't mean I believe it now. Maybe I have been educated further. But I know Moose used to work at Wendy's, and he is part of the reason I kind of better understood how difficult those jobs can actually be, because, like, I was working as a waitress, and Moose worked at Wendy's. And I always thought of waitressing as, like, higher up than working in fast food, which I still think that waitresses and servers and, like, people working at more high, like, actual, like, dine-in places. I was trying to find the word. should be paid more than those who work in fast food. I don't think that the idea that they're like that fast food workers don't do it as a career is quite what I thought it was before, I guess, is really all I could say there. Because I, like I had previously stated, really thought of fast food as like this is what you do when you are young, and then you don't do it, and then this is what you do if you need extra income after you retire. But I don't think you can depend on people like that. I think during this pandemic it's kind of shown that that's not the case as well, because so many people relied, like, we didn't have restaurants, open, really. Most places just closed. I know that there's some restaurants I actually enjoyed eating that are, like, permanently closed now. Not that I eat out much, but every once in a while. But I think that minimum wage, the issue with raising minimum wage up is that, as minimum wage goes up to $25 an hour, I'm just throwing out a random number, then, like, the cost of things goes up. And that's because companies are greedy and the people at the top are greedy. And obviously there is, like, cost of materials and stuff. But I think that part of the issue is mostly just that the people at the top are greedy. Which is why I love when people are like, eat the rich. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with eating the rich. I've heard that people taste like pork. I'm not a big pork person myself, don't really eat it, but I could adjust. If we're gonna eat all the rich people, they should be very cheap. Just gonna zone out for a second. And I don't necessarily know what a number would be for, like, federal minimum wage, though, because I think that if we set a federal minimum wage, then it also kind of, you have to think about, does the cost of living everywhere go up, or are you more well off if you live in Nebraska making $15 an hour than if you live in New York or California? Because living in New York or California, the cost of living is just higher. And I don't think that it's feasible to say, well, just don't live in New York or California. It's not that easy to just uproot yourselves. And I personally hate Nebraska. So I like the climate here. That shouldn't be an issue. It shouldn't be like just move if you don't want to live somewhere as expensive. It's like the people who are like, well, if you don't like this about America, just leave. I'm like, it's not that easy, because if it was, I'd be Canadian. But people are stupid. I think we just need to close this whole, like, as inflation is more of an issue than anything else. Which is why we should just kill all the humans. Okay, stop speaking your inner monologue out. Inner monologue. Kill all the humans. I think that, like, minimum wage should continue to be state by state just because of the cost of living difference. Or we should all just have the same cost of living, but I think it'd be a lot harder to bring it down in New York than to bring it up everywhere. And I can't imagine what someone who lives in, like, Oklahoma would do if all of a sudden they had to pay New York prices for things. Like, imagine if people in Oklahoma had to start paying $1,300 a month for a little 2-bedroom. Or worse, you could pay New York City prices, $1,500 a month for a studio. New York City is a problematic place. Like, I love it, I'd live there again 100 times over. I would never leave. I miss it a lot most days, but oh my god. The cost of living, everybody. Like, we live in a very nice area right now. I do. Moose and I do. Moose just can fuck off, though. We live in a very nice town with good schools and all that, and I think that we are incredibly privileged to live here, but I think that a big issue with, like, our cost of living here, it costs more to live in a nice little village than in the city, which is very different than being in New York City, where it costs more to live right in the city. Not that our city's nice. Live in a shitty city. I also, the thing that sparked all of this in my brain is that with the increase in minimum wage and stuff, and with all the competitive rates because of the pandemic, I made more money as a waitress in high school, but I could be making the same hourly rate I make right now at most restaurants. At like I know a lot of the chain restaurants like Chili's and Applebee's and Buffalo Wild Wings are hiring people at the rate that I work for right now, but plus tips. And it's truly incredibly depressing to think about that, because I'd also get a weekly paycheck. My taxes would be different, but that's really it. And it's a little heartbreaking to have to think about that, because like I know the Subway down the street from us is hiring people at $17.50 an hour, and I had to work for a year on the front lines of a pandemic to make $16 an hour. So I think that people who work in fast food should definitely be making that much, should be able to live off that money. But I don't think they should be making more than medical workers. I think that a lot of people are like, well, if we increase the pay of those people, like, yeah, minimum wage, it should just be the minimum. But that's not to say, oh, well, you don't get to make as much as the minimum wage worker, or you have to be stuck at the minimum wage worker's salary. No. If you are working in the medical field, you should be making more money. If you are a teacher, you should be making a hell of a lot more money than you make now, because teachers don't make enough money, and teachers are some of the most important people. Teachers and doctors and nurses, very important people. And tradesmen, I mean, I don't know how the trades do money-wise, honestly. I've heard actually that they do quite well, but they should continue to do well. Damn it. Because your education, it's not necessarily that your education should fully equate to, like, how much you make. Like, if you have a PhD in art, then that should not be the same as having a PhD in biology necessarily. But I don't know, nothing wrong with artists. That was like the one thing that I'm like, why would you get a PhD in art when you could just go be an artist and just do your thing? Unless you're like going into like studies of art and working in a museum. I don't actually know how any of that would work. But I think that people need to value their workers more. I guess that's all. I'm just upset because I'm sick of people being like, well, why does nobody work at your job? Is it because of the pandemic? Is it because of the vaccine mandate? No. Which I don't know if this is a national thing. I think it's just a New York thing, but medical workers are required to get their vaccines by the 27th, and like any company that has more than 100 people, I think. It might be federal. I think it's actually federal. I don't know. Someone's going to correct me in the comments. I don't know anything. I just know what affects me, and I'm trying to improve that. But I don't necessarily know what's up with this because I work too much and I'm tired. But I think that the vaccine mandate is going to make things worse, but I don't think that, I tell people all the time that's not why we're understaffed. We're understaffed because you could walk across the street to the grocery store and get a job that pays $18 an hour where they're starting us at 15. And that's not enough for someone who has to deal with what we deal with. I had a woman try to hand me a bag full of poop. She handed me a bag of poop. In a plastic bag. And then she was, and we told her, because we gave her a specimen cup for it, she was like, and we were like, you needed to put this in the cup. You needed to put the stool sample in the cup. And then she was like, well, what was the bag for? It was for the cup, to carry the cup. I am still triggered about that. This happened last week. This will be a week from when I post this, that this has happened, and I am still upset. So that's why I think that we should just overthrow the government. Thank you for tuning in to Nobody's Listening.